All right, we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. That video brings back a lot of great memories. Thanks for joining us for the launch of NextGen Presents. I'm David Harris, class of 2017 out of CSO8, and by way of Alpha Squad for the preppies in the audience. Over the past year, graduates across generations have told us they want more professional development, mentorship, and real-world insights from fellow Falcons, and that feedback has directly inspired this series. NextGen Presents is designed to create meaningful conversations about career path, transition realities, and where emerging fields are headed. Tonight's focus on space reflects just how central this domain has become operationally, commercially, and strategically. You'll hear from graduates at different stages of their journey, sharing candid lessons and forward-looking perspectives. And without further delay, we'll go ahead and kick things off. And as always, go Falcons, beat the Goats, beat the Mules. Over to you, Charlie.
All right. Thanks, David, for the great intro. You can hear me okay, right? All right, perfect. Well, thank you again, David, for that warm intro, and for to Navir and the rest of the AOG team for putting on this wonderful event. And thank you all in attendance for being here as well. Our goal broadly tonight is not anything technical related. It's meant to be a practical conversation about how careers in space actually unfold, what surprised us as a whole, what challenged us, and what we do differently looking back in the past. Again, eager to start this series and excited that we are kicking it off with space. With that said, we're joined by Oscar Chacon from the class of 2018. He's the business development executive at CACI, often referred to as CACI, and Nestor Levin, class of 2022, Space Force officer who is working on the Futures Task Force right now and has experience in SpaceWorks and other endeavors within the Space Force. We did have a third panelist for tonight, Jason Kim, the CEO of Firefly Aerospace, but he had a launch window that opened up for the Alpha Flight 7 rocket. So unfortunately, he can't join us. And as we all know from our time in the military, flexibility is key. And we wish him, as well as the Firefly team, all the best of luck as they get ready for launch and increase our national launch capabilities. So with that said, tonight we'll spend about 35 minutes in curated discussion, followed by audience Q&A, and then we'll close with a rapid fire round. I'll direct your questions intentionally to draw out different perspectives and to help us cover meaningful ground. So with that said, we will begin, and I'll kick it over to Nestor for a brief intro, followed by Oscar.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So Nestor Levin here, class of 2022. I had a fairly unconventional path to working in space. Immediately went to grad school post-academy, and then after that came to LA. My career assignment was as a 6-1, so as a scientist, chemist and physicist. And so I've been in LA for the last 2 years pretty much, working on initially science and technology planning, and that kind of transitioned into helping stand up Space Futures Command. Currently Task Force Futures, and at the same time, I'm our liaison with SpaceWorks in the Commercial Space Office.
Great. Hello, everybody. Oscar Chacon, class of 2018, Cadet Squadron 39 is where I graduated from. I also played soccer at the academy, had a great 4 years there. I owe a lot of kind of who I am to the academy, and I'm super grateful to be here speaking to the folks and answering some questions. Post the academy, I came to Los Angeles, where I spent my entire career in active duty. I served 5.5 years. And as Charlie mentioned, I now work at CACI or CACI. I've been doing that for 2 years, doing business development. So I'm super excited to be here. And Charlie and the AOG, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Oscar. And thank you, Nestor, as well. So we'll start off with the first of several questions to you both. Starting off with Nestor, we'll go in that order over to Oscar. Was space as a whole plan A? Was it plan B? Or did it evolve from something else entirely?
Yeah, pretty great question. For me, at least, space was definitely not plan A by any stretch, and I wasn't even thinking much about it while I was still at the academy. And it was just so new. It literally just stood up as I was a sophomore there. But by being a 6-1 as a scientist in the Air Force, and then after completing grad school, I was able to fill a 6-1 scientist billet here at Space Systems Command. And typically, if the Space Force doesn't have certain career fields like scientists or operations research analysts, and even needs like contracting support, sometimes they pull that from the Air Force. And so it's important to know that even though you can be a Air Force officer, you're not necessarily bounded by, just working for the Air Force. You can have a lot of serendipitous opportunities to be supporting the overall Space Force mission. And I had this feeling at the Academy that, space was not super interesting or dynamic because it hasn't been for a long time, in the sense that, it was a very docile domain. Not much was going on outside of like long procurement cycles, long-term technology development cycles. But I think at the time that the Space Force was coming online and a lot of new developments in commercial space were coming online, that definitely made me think more and more that this was a very interesting space to be in. So just like worked out in a non-planned way, but I'm glad that it happened the way it did.
Great. Yeah, and for me, space was definitely not plan A. It wasn't even the picture for me. In 2018, Space Force hadn't stood up yet. My plan A as a senior was graduate, hopefully get stationed in Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, and hopefully work on something cool. And my career kind of started out in a unique way. It was 3 days before graduation, and I got a call from a lieutenant colonel who was stationed at Space Systems Command, and he was interviewing all the incoming acquisition officers from the Academy, because he was standing up an innovative branch called the Space Defense Task Force, which sounded really cool to first class Chacon back then. And not knowing anything about space, I just kind of interviewed and answered questions based on who I was, how I thought I should be interviewing. And long story short, I got that job on the spot. So I entered active duty with this feeling of pride and the feeling of I need to perform to the best of my ability, because I got kind of handpicked to be part of this innovative group. And that was a great first experience. So in 2018, I joined Space Systems Command out here in Los Angeles as an acquirer in Enterprise Ground Services, which was the first role I had, where I was integrating previously stovepiped satellite ground control systems. So it was brand new to me. I had to learn the domain. I had to do all that work, not only understanding the acquisition side of things, but the mission side of things. And then in 2020, I raised my hand to transition into the Space Force. So I took my oath in that transition wearing a mask, because we were still in COVID times. So that was a very unique time to be standing up a branch in a new service like that. And it was just really cool to be a part of it here in Los Angeles during the SMC days, now SSC.
Thanks, Oscar, and thanks, Nestor, for that insight as how you both got into the Space Force eventually, but then also in the industry as a whole initially. So both, I guess, when you were cadets, as well as maybe, as you transition into active duty, how is the decision to go into space received? Whether it was by fellow cadets, fellow officers in some cases, but then also family and elsewhere. If you could elaborate on that a little bit, Oscar, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think honestly, being super candid with the group here, I decided to join the Space Force because I liked the mission. I knew I wouldn't have to leave Los Angeles, and I can kind of just be stationed here for a while. And family is a big part of my life. And I know for many of us in service, family makes a lot of our decisions, right? We think about them. So thinking about that, I was like, this is the perfect transition. Now, what wasn't as timely of an event that happened was that Space Force show on Netflix happening and coming out at the same time I started telling people that I worked in the Space Force. So it was definitely a fun way of being able to show up and tell people where I work, and they understood it, but they didn't fully understand the depth of what exactly that meant. And I think that's a really cool, unique opportunity that we have as some of the first members of the Space Force, is to educate the community on what that actually means. I think most people don't realize how much they're actually interacting with space every day, right? From their maps to their ATMs to their alarms, all these different things, that a day without space means a lot more than people think. Personally, how did I view joining the Space Force? At that time, it was just the next challenge for me. And at the academy, I feel like we learn how to handle new experiences, new environments, and have the mentality of, I can do this, I will learn, and I'll do my best at it. And that is honestly the approach I've taken into each job I've started, both in uniform and in industry, because that's a whole nother transition, whole new identity you kind of have to build. But yeah, I was just excited. And as a second lieutenant, I remember on day one, my boss came to me and was like, we need to award 2 contracts. So I say, yes, sir. And I go to my computer and I Google, what is a DoD contract? Because I just didn't know. So, but I learned and I figured it out. And within a year, I had awarded 2 $500 million SBIR Phase 3 contracts as a second lieutenant. And that was just such a cool experience. And what I learned from that is that good work isn't rewarded with more work, it's rewarded with opportunity. And that's what I was given. And it was really cool to understand that at an early point in my career, is that I can kind of navigate my career to some extent by how I perform, by the relationships I build. And all of that just kind of built this larger connection to my why I'm in the Space Force, why I'm in uniform, why what I do actually matters. So that was kind of the mentality I had when I first put on the Space Force uniform.
Yeah, to kind of echo what Oscar was alluding to with the Netflix show, like the impression that most people have about Space Force comes from that, or they just don't know much about it. And so that definitely added a layer of kind of mystery to it. And again, because I wasn't thinking much about that at my time at the academy, it definitely added to the sense of uncertainty. But, we're taught during our 4 years there that you have to be comfortable in that uncertainty and just try to figure things out. And that definitely translates into your time active duty. And ultimately, personally, I was pretty excited about it, not just for the fact that LA is a pretty sweet location, getting lucky with that, especially being in an Air Force career assignment. But, in all seriousness, I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. I was pretty ignorant in my space knowledge at the time, but that's where all the learning happens. So I spent a few months just talking with a bunch of people, both in uniform here in LA, out in Colorado, talking to the people who were were the office I came into before I got there, getting their take on things, just doing a lot of research and reading, trying to understand both the breadth horizontally and in depth as much as I could about what the Space Force is, what it does, and how it does it, both from the operations side and the acquisition side. And if you really just try to, study like we did at the academy, within a few months, you can get fairly proficient. And that's also where you have to step out of your comfort zone and just talk with people, because the only way you're going to learn, what's actually happening and not get any, BS is by talking with people and by, not being afraid to reach out to even senior leadership like a colonel, because from what I've seen, if they have a brand new second lieutenant coming to them asking all these questions, demonstrating this interest, they'll be more than happy of imparting anything that they know or things to watch out for.
Awesome. Thank you both for those answers and the descriptions of how it was received and kind of those early career insights. And with that said, just as a little bit of background for the Space Force show, General Saltzman, the chief of space operations, was on a recent podcast, Main Engine Cutoff, and he was talking about how important having shows like that, even if they are kind of goofy, is important to the space, pantheon and getting it into popular culture and everything like that. And another brief comment is, it shows you what a decade makes in terms of how space is approached. When I was leaving the Air Force Academy and going into active duty, space was very much a subset in a career that was kind of somewhat looked down upon and not really considered, a good career or a fun career. So it's pretty good to see how that mindset has changed quite a bit, not only with the work you guys have done, but as the Space Force has gotten established. So great to see and great to hear. Okay, so starting with Nestor on this end, what misconception did you have about working in space initially? And if you didn't or did, what did you do to learn from it and educate yourself and your teammates?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question because I think a lot of officers come in not knowing exactly what they're getting into with the Space Force, considering it's about 5 years old at this point. And to be fully transparent, even while at the academy, I perceived space as being not very exciting. I was pretty ignorant about that. And one could argue again for a long time it was. Space has always been this, you know, uh, quiet domain, not much going on. Everything takes multiple years. It's dominated by a few major defense contractors like Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, Raytheon, and building out satellites or different capabilities took many, many years. And so one thing that I was told is you can come in as an acquisitions officer mid-program, and then 2-3 years later you would leave and the program is still going, right? So that sense of like ownership is definitely a downside that I heard in the past. But I think there's been a lot of change in that aspect. In recent years, there have been a lot of factors that have come together to flip the script on that. And you've got rapidly evolving threats from adversaries. You have commercial technology just accelerating exponentially in terms of uh, the capability of different technology and how cheap it can be. And so, we're seeing companies like SpaceX that came up in the last decade, uh, Jason Kim's Firefly Aerospace, pushing the boundary in a whole lot of ways. And being in the Space Force, I think it is a service that is most tied to the success of the private sector and the commercial space industry, unlike many other services, right? Because you're not going to have a commercial company building a fighter jet, but you will have a commercial company building a satellite or a new rocket or different software applications. And so just space has become so much more fast paced and complex than I appreciated in the past. And like, it is mind boggling to see how many new space startups are coming online every month. And so, in my opinion, I think it was very exciting to see that my previous understanding of what space was, I was pleasantly surprised, let's say. And so, all that to say that I think now it's an excellent time to be in the Space Force because there's just so much change, but in a fun way.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, Nestor. And yeah, dude, I thought space was going to be launching things into space, to be honest. And it's actually funny. I have yet to see a launch in person or be a part of a
Yeah,
team that was responsible for sending something
yeah,
into space. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be like a Jason Kim where I'm, part of all these launches all the time, sending things to the moon. But what I didn't realize is that all those launches and our high value assets, they don't have a real impact unless you have the infrastructure, the platform, the software tools to control those assets, and being able to manage the data that comes off those assets as well. Like, that is the real impact that comes to the operator, that comes to the warfighter who's receiving these capabilities at the end of the day. And I'm super grateful for part of my career. I was a UI UX designer, and essentially I would sit with operators, ask them their pain points, see their workflows, sit in their operations center, and then go and build an application for them. So I really got to see how the other services rely on them and rely on the Space Force to get the effects they need when they need them. And to give an example of something I learned, there was a space operator who said he got a request from a special ops team who needed to know how deep the snow was at the top of this mountain because they needed to land a helicopter there. So they submitted a space support request, is what it's called, and the Space Force was able to give them that information in a timely manner. And that was really, to me, where I was like, as an acquisition officer, I am acquiring the contracts to build the software. And at that point, I was building the software to allow an operator to answer these questions to someone who's deployed and needs real mission effects. So that was a really cool, eye-opening experience for me, where I not only understood the depth and knowledge of the Space Force, but also understood how it all comes together for the joint fight. And as cool it is to say we're a new service and a new branch, we are interconnected with everything else. And you're starting to see that more and more as we start talking more about the fight and the race that we're in right now. So it's those stories that really connected to me, why the Space Force is important and why it's important to share those capabilities and have a way to request them and a way to maximize how quickly and efficiently we can get that to the warfighter.
All right. Thank you both for the insight there. Going right back to you, Oscar, what is the hardest space problem that you have worked on?
Let's see. Aside from figuring out what our uniforms should look like, because I was a part of that group, that survey group, when I was a lieutenant, I would say the hardest problem was taking an operator's workflow, which they were so used to and so familiar with, but a workflow that was also done on Microsoft products. Like, we were fighting and probably are still fighting a war with Microsoft products. And the hardest problem was figuring out which part of that workflow to digitize first and get it into the hands of operators and delivering it in a timely manner, under cost, and with a lot of value. And the way that we got after that was actually bringing operators from the Combined Space Operations Center at Vandenberg Space Force Base. And they sat down with us in our office in Santa Monica for 2 days. And we gave everyone stickies, and we were all sitting in front of a whiteboard, and we asked them to write down their entire workflow, who was involved, what information was being tracked, what information was being exchanged, who was making decisions, what decisions were being made, what was the timeline. And then from there, as a team, we were able to decide which problem set we could solve with the most impact in the shortest amount of time. And that's one thing people don't really realize, that there's a lot of tools our space professionals need that either don't exist or don't meet their needs. So there was one staff sergeant I met at the CSPOC who had built his own app in Excel to solve a problem he had. So the Space Force has these innovative folks, and it's really cool that we have programs where these individuals can go learn how to code, can go learn how to do things, can go to AQUIC, the acquisition instructor course, and learn how to do things more innovatively and quickly. So it's solving those problems that really gives an operator time back to be able to make decisions and spend more time analyzing data and doing the things that actually move the needle.
Yeah, Oscar, by the way, I guess I have to thank you for the new Space Force service dress, because those look sweet. I wish I could have them. Yeah. For me, I would say the hardest problem that I've worked on, and I still am, still being in the Space Force, is it's often a buzzword, but how to cohesively give a demand signal as a service to what, in terms of acquisitions, the service needs on various timescales. And so it's about aligning various stakeholders who have equities in science and technology, and aligning that into a coherent demand signal. So meaning, how do we predictably communicate our needs and what our future priorities might be? And so it's a pretty broad and important question, but the thing about it is it's very esoteric, hard to define, but also complex at the same time. You're trying to distill a wide range of competing authorities, different budgets, different mission needs, and different risk appetites within that. And so you need to make tangible, digestible artifacts that someone, whether they're an investor or a founder, can look at and plan accordingly. Because from my experience so far is that, as far as dual use space defense tech goes, the government is frequently a core customer, especially on the earlier research and development side. And so my involvement with that is taking the broader operational and strategic needs that various stakeholders have, and scouting promising startups at the same time to match with those capability needs. And at the same time, working with investors to do due diligence calls and helping them, again, as Oscar said, to educate them on what the Space Force needs, why it needs it, and how you could foresee a startup fitting into that. Because there's been a major barrier, frequently called the valley of death, that a startup has to go through to go from first starting to being in a program of record or having a predictable revenue flow there. And so it's extremely rewarding, and you definitely learn a lot just because it's so broad a problem. It touches a whole lot of things, and that's why it can also be challenging. It's a multifaceted issue that no one has complete ownership of, and so it's this. It develops the skill set of coalition building and bringing a lot of people in alignment together. And so you learn things across business, across tech, across military doctrine, and actual operational needs. And so you have to love learning new things and always being open-minded and being aware of what just the sheer amount that you don't know. So there's a level of humility to it, I think. And so I would say I would consider it a success for myself if I can help move the needle even just a little bit in a faster direction.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And with that said, Oscar, I will say nice work on the service dress. I'm glad I don't have to wear those. So thank you. I say that just because I don't have to wear them. It's a great looking uniform though. So okay, well, going back to Oscar for this next question, kind of in line with the fourth question we ask. The next question is about how this is a high context industry, as Nestor said, very esoteric. It takes a long time to sometimes even know which questions to ask because is so much context, so much technical capability that we all learn being in this industry over time. So with that said, Oscar, how do you signal credibility in this domain?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. That is a great question. Why that's a great question is because I think I fell into the boat when I first joined the Space Force of like, I'm not technical. I studied business management. I'm an acquisition officer, but I know I have so much to learn. And as Nestor mentioned, like there's an education piece to all this, and there always will be in any job that we take, right? It just feels like the Space Force one might be a little higher because of how technical a lot of those things are. But as I've learned through my active duty career, I believe that those signals of credibility include, do you understand the mission? Do you know your role in the mission? And do you care about the mission? And everything we do ties to the mission. At the end of the day, it's how can we bring something to the fight and win? So if you can speak to how certain capabilities impact the warfighter, then you know more than most people. And that's why when I was in uniform and now in industry, I always ask, why? Why do we need that data? Why do we need to build this feature in this application? Why does the operator need to do that? And it just helps paint this larger picture. And at the end of the day, it allows you to solve it allows you to solve problems in maybe a quicker or different way. And I think that's something that, younger COGs, they haven't been in active duty for as long to maybe get, thrown off by bringing a new idea that doesn't work. We're bringing new ideas. We haven't failed yet in active duty and in the real world. So we're going to think outside the box. And once you understand the mission, you can raise some questions that maybe people just thought like, we do that because that's just how we've been doing it. Like, why do you use Word products to send to each other for tasking a tactical unit for EW effects? I don't know. That's just how we've done it. Okay, well, maybe there's a better way. And another kind of mindset that I've had that I learned at my time in Section 31, which was the Space Force's first organic software factory, is outcomes over outputs. And that's just always been a phrase that I lead with teams because most people can do the work. Most companies can build the software, can build the tool that you asked for, and they'll call that an output. You asked for it, I built it, there it is, it's in your hands. But can you build the right feature with an actual mission impact outcome tied to it? That's when you're delivering real value. So output would be delivering an application that manages space EW effects. But outcomes for our space operators would now look like they can task 30% more efficiently with 40% less time required to execution. So that is outcome focused. And if you know the mission, then you know what moves the needle to get those outcomes that you really need. And I think caring more about the mission sometimes takes you further than how much you know technically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. For me, what I would say, I think what constitutes credibility, it changes and depends whether you're still in government or on the private side. At least from what I've seen and what I've experienced, credibility for a Space Force acquisition officer in particular comes from a few different things. Namely, it would be trust, creativity, competency, and your energy. So when I say trust, that takes the form of relationship building and networking, which can come off well slimy when people hear that word networking, but I think it has a very important value there. When you're working with a lot of startups, investors, or people on this new wave in space, they don't want to interact with an acquisition officer who they see as, not really invested in what they're doing or not willing to see their side of the table, their side of the aisle. And so, if you can establish that trust early on, then it helps move the mission forward. Um, and networking for an acquisition officer, I think, is very valuable, especially if you're just starting off. Like, I think a lot of lieutenants have this perception that they shouldn't be doing that. But I would say, on the contrary, like, if you're meeting with new founders, discovering what startups are doing, that helps show that you are invested in what they're doing, and you find it important, and you're willing to work with them and help them understand the government perspective on a lot of things. Because a lot of the time, unless they got out of the service and then started a startup, they just don't know that. And so by doing that, ultimately you learn what is technologically possible, not what is impossible due to bureaucracy. And so further on that, I think the competency piece is just important so that those relationships turn into something enduring and long term. Creativity and problem solving, and how you try to piece different data points that seem disparate at first, but then come together, I think is also important. Like Oscar mentioned, if you come in and you haven't been burned before, you're willing to take more risk and have a lot of, just creative thinking that you try to apply to novel problems. And it's something that I think the Academy does well at teaching you. And so the last thing I would say is having a high amount of energy. And basically, the way I see that is, don't just do the bare minimum of what your job entails, but see whatever problems that are, recurring, but not necessarily within your job bucket. Could you go and apply your skill set and your experience to help solve those problems? Because if you help someone else, then down the road they will help you, and it just establishes again that credibility and that trust.
Great insights. Thank you, Nestor, and thank you, Oscar. I will say that networking does sometimes get a low view, and it can be seen a little bit as slimy. I would say just do it for the people connections, regardless of what happens, whether it's in your industry, whether it's outside of it. It's pretty amazing to meet a lot of people. If that matches your personality, it's something that I think for the broader community that we should do more and more of. So I will resonate with that specifically. So this next question is just for Oscar, being out of the Space Force now. So if you could redo your final year in uniform, what would you do differently? What would you start earlier? If you can expound on that a little.
For sure. Yeah. Sorry, Nestor, you won't be able to answer this one till hopefully way later down in your career. But honestly, it's a common theme that Nestor has been bringing up, which I love, and why I'm smiling when he's talking about this. It's, I would just get involved more. I would attend more events on base. I would go to industry events, some socials that they throw together, and networking events, because I never really thought about how I could serve my network and how he could serve me. And there were so many good people doing great things. And I really just want to be surrounded by that. And I would have been a lot smarter on other missions that people were working on just by talking with them. I would have been able to cut the bureaucratic barriers that exist when you're sending an email and there's no relationship with that person on the other end, by just getting out and talking to people. And that's something I really understood taking the uniform off. And to be honest, taking the uniform off gave me a deeper sense of pride for my past, for the Academy, for my time in active duty. And I wish I had carried that with me a little more, the front of my mind when I was serving, because it's such a great community to come from and be a part of, and helping others who were I was in their shoes not too long ago. And I just think you can get more done both personally and as a group when strong relationships exist.
All right. Thank you, Oscar. I appreciate that insight. And Nestor, soon enough, you won't have to put on that service dress uniform, but it'll be a little while, hopefully for our country. So, okay. So, final question, at least for these core questions now, starting with Nestor, what excites you the most about the next 5 to 10 years in space? And if you want to go beyond that timeline, feel free. Go ahead, Nestor.
Yeah, so I think that's a very exciting question, because the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot happening in this industry, and I would dissect it or bifurcate it in two lanes. The first one, more on the Space Force side, and I can be a bit of a history nerd, but I think we are in the same spot now as the Army Air Corps was in the 1920s, about 100 years ago. Airplanes were a new thing. They're used for some things, but as that technology evolves and new tactics, new doctrine is developed, we can use them in more creative and unique ways that people previously didn't think we could. Back to the point of, space was a docile domain. Now it's not. Now there's a lot of stuff happening there. I think, given that it's a new service and we have new kinds of threats to contend with, new mission sets to do, and just how much the technology is evolving, I think the next century of what space looks like will be defined by what happens in the next decade. Because, like, you can just look back in the last 10 years with SpaceX reusable launch. Before then, the concept of what Pandora's box that opens was not on people's minds. And if you just think about what will happen now in the next 10 years, I think that'll be extremely impactful down the road. The second thing I would say is more on the private side, the economic side. I think the last few years and the next few years has been, a once in a generation opportunity that doesn't come often. Everyone talks about, the current AI boom, right? That investment super cycle. But what's often not talked about in the mainstream is that space is rapidly progressing in a similar way. Just the amount of institutional and venture capital dollars that are coming in to this industry that allows all these startups to flourish and bring on all these capabilities for the Space Force in space-related defense tech, it's higher than it's ever been. And just being here in Southern California, like, every week it seems I go on LinkedIn and I see another factory coming online, another startup raising money. And it's just really incredible to see, even though I've only been here for a couple of years, the change is night and day, even just such a short amount of time. In the next few years, I think the amount of M&A activity, the amount of IPO exits is going to go up. That's going to fuel more money coming into the system. That's going to help the Space Force be more successful long term. We have major infrastructure, national projects like Golden Dome, and a lot of new acquisition reforms that are coming in that will hopefully lubricate the wheels of this engine to help make things easier, faster, and just a win-win for everyone involved. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very exciting few years, and I'm just lucky to be able to be a part of it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nestor. And it's super cool to be sitting in this moment now and thinking about one day down the road telling your grandchildren, like, I was one of the first Space Force Guardians. Like, that was such a cool kind of awakening for me when I realized that, because of how young the service is. What excites me most about space is moving from being a niche enabler to a decisive domain. And over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to stop asking if space matters and start asking how fast can we adapt. And that's, with the government, with industry partners, and having more money to innovate and move faster. On the mission side, we're finally getting honest about contested space, as you mentioned, Nestor. Resilience, speed, decision-making under uncertainty. And that creates real problems to solve. They're not just PowerPoint solutions. There's no more exercises. They're going to be real, and we need to be ready for that. What excites me personally is the people. Space is still young enough that individuals can shape that culture. They can shape that doctrine that you mentioned and those outcomes in a way that just isn't possible in more mature domains. And for cadets and young officers, the opportunity is unmatched. Whether you stay in uniform or transition out, the combination of operational experience, technical literacy, and leadership in space sets you up to lead at the intersection of government, industry, and innovation, as we've been mentioning. So it's one of those few places where your work today can genuinely define how the domain operates a decade from now, 100 years from now, right? There will be a Nestor Levin 100 years from now looking back and being like, I love history. Here's where the Space Force was 100 years ago. And that's pretty rare.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And I fully agree across the board on all points. Not that you needed my insight, but that was really, really well done. So moving to the audience questions, we've had one come in so far, so I encourage those in the audience continue to bring in questions, make whatever you guys want to ask, feel free to. So the first one is from Adam Schultz, 1999, Navir. Pretty proud of that class, I would assume. So as current or former Guardians, how has being part of a new service shaped your sense of purpose and leadership? And then as a two-parter, what opportunities and challenges come with helping define Space Force culture from the ground up? Oscar, we'll go over to you first.
Perfect. Nestor gives you a little time to think there. Appreciate the question, Charlie. Appreciate the question, Adam. Answering your first question there, how has it shaped my sense of purpose and leadership? Honestly, it's empowered me a lot more than I think I would have had if I wasn't in the Space Force. And I say that because the Space Force is pretty flat. I think when I was a first lieutenant, I was overseeing 200 Guardians, airmen, as well as contractors to develop applications for the warfighter. That's a lot of opportunity to learn, to grow, to make mistakes, to just lean forward and lean into it. And I just don't think you're going to find those opportunities everywhere you go. So from that perspective, it's given me a lot more purpose in how I carry myself, how I educate myself, how I lead, how I present myself. And I think I just learned a lot as a leader, being honest. To this day, working in industry, I lean a lot on my experience as a lieutenant and as a captain. Now, in terms of what opportunities and challenges come with helping define Space Force culture from the ground up, culture is a really interesting topic. I love culture. I think sometimes we're told that culture are buzzwords. They're the words you throw on a wall in a common space, and that's what we do. But really, culture comes down to the tiny interactions that you have day to day. As an employee, as a member of the team, that is the culture. And what you're seeing in the Space Force, it's a brand new opportunity to define that, where you're bringing folks from different services, folks from the academy, and you're bringing those together with innovative ideas from different cultures. A quick story, I worked at an office in Santa Monica where we got like breakfast, and it was like very Google-esque. And that just created a different culture, one that told you were innovative, one that told you think differently. And you just show up with purpose, a different kind of purpose. So Space Force just has that opportunity of being so young to really define that and to navigate what that looks like. And you can impact that as a lieutenant, all the way to a colonel, right? So those are my thoughts. Over to you, Nestor.
Yeah, I would just say on the first question for purpose and leadership, we've kind of alluded to it before, but because the Space Force is so new, that gives you a lot of ownership of what comes after, the generation after, what just the gravity of the historic moment we're in. And so I think, feeling like what the Air Force was in its early days, trying to apply that to today, and just it makes everything seem that much more impactful and important that we can't get it wrong now. And we have to put a lot more energy than we otherwise typically would into making sure we set up the future for success. In terms of opportunities and challenges, I think those are two sides of the same coin, in the sense that, as Oscar mentioned, the Space Force is very flat and it's very small. It's only like 10,000 Guardians. It surprised me just how, easily I've been able to interact with, senior officers. So let's say, majors, lieutenant colonels, and be very pragmatic in approaching certain questions. Like, I think compared to other services, that hierarchical barrier that typically exists goes away, and that allows us to be more dynamic and operate faster and try to focus more on the problem itself than whatever is outside of that, what people typically call bureaucracy. And I think that's something I truly do appreciate a lot about the Space Force. Yeah.
All right. Thank you both again. Great responses. So the next question is from Lieutenant Heaton for Nestor specifically. In your eyes, what are the Space Force's biggest technology priorities?
Well, unofficially, just my opinion, not speaking for the service, but I do think one important thing the next few years is autonomy in orbit. Like, we've been hearing a lot about that, as well as how do we take a lot of data, a lot of information that we collect from all these thousands of satellites and make a coherent picture of what it's telling us and be able to get that to an operator faster so that we can then make decisions faster as well. Basically closing the kill chain, as it were. And I think that kind of all the stuff that's happening terrestrially with, drones, edge processing, the same thing will apply in space, where we try to move quicker than an adversary would. And we've never had to think about space in that context with that mental framing in mind before. So I think that's also a major challenge, and it's going to impact things from current constellations we have up to future Golden Dome. And so I think from all the conversations I've been having, that's definitely one of the higher up priorities.
Great. Thank you, Nestor, for those responses. So as we wait for more audience questions to come in, and if you have anything, please feel free to drop in the Q&A. We will start off our rapid fire segment, just one sentence each for you guys, starting with Oscar first, and then over to Nestor. We'll do the hardest military habit to unlearn.
Folding my socks in a certain way and being obsessed with that. If you know, you know.
Yeah. Some things never change. The hardest habit to unlearn has been moving away from a very linear and structured way of thinking towards being more creative, dynamic, and interdisciplinary.
Yep. Great answers there. And I will say, Oscar, I can empathize. I put my shoelaces still in my shoes, and my wife always kind of wonders why, but it's a habit I can't break. So, and Nestor, thinking more freely, that's something that I sometimes do as well. So, all right. So, Nestor, starting off with you on this one. Best advice you received during transition? Oh, I apologize. That's going to be I'm sorry, I read that out right. That is just going to be an Oscar question. So, Nestor, I will back off of you. Sorry about that.
I was excited to see what you were going to say. Yeah, best advice I received during my transition out of the Space Force and the military in general was that no one will take better care of your career than you will. So if given the option, take the opportunities that excite you, that feel like a positive step for your career.
All right. And since we have Nestor not being able to see in the future as to what he will learn most during his transition, I'll say that one of the most impactful statements I heard as I was transitioning, I did the transition assistance program at multiple bases, one in an area where I knew I was going to be settled in the Denver area. And for my last duty location in Omaha, the gentleman who was running the program said, kind of talking about the importance of networking, he said, who you know will get you in the door. What you know will seal the deal. And I think generally speaking, that is pretty true. I mean, there's different experiences for everyone. I'll also say a little bit of anti-advice. We got told a lot, and I think this is a factor of recruitment for football and just more broadly to get in the academy. Saying you'll be set up for life, I think is still a pretty accurate statement coming from a service academy. But don't ever think, broadly speaking, that it's just going to be all easy, for finding jobs, finding new opportunities. So always be proactive, whether you're transitioning or even just moving to another part of the military. So, next rapid fire, worst advice you receive. Nestor and Oscar, we can highlight both transitioning as well as in the Space Force.
Yeah, worst advice I received in my transition was you can't get out that quick. That was because I decided to get out, and 3 months later I was out, and that was kind of hard to hear. I was hoping that I would kind of get more support from the folks that were helping me transition, but I leaned in and was able to get out in 3 months efficiently, quickly, and into a new role where I felt confident. And it is possible, 3-month transition. So
I look forward to that. The worst advice that I've received, or not for transition, but I guess just at the academy, like one thing that we were taught, maybe subliminally or explicitly, that I think isn't necessarily true. Maybe it's a hot take, maybe it's not, but the academy is structured in such a way that it says that to be a good officer, you have to be very, generally well broadened. But I think some of the best officers that I've ever encountered are very, very good, or have a reputation for being very, very good at one or several things. And I think developing that expertise or finding your niche is also very important, and something I even tried to do while I was still at the academy.
Awesome. Thank you, gents. All right. So back to the audience questions. We did have one more that came in, and this will be our last one in the interest of time as we close. So coming from Joe Kierhan, class of 2011. Thanks, Joe, for putting this in there. For both Oscar and Nestor, how do you ramp up new hires and new teammates into the high context environment that is space? Nestor, we'll start with you on that one.
For that, I would say you learn most by experiencing. And so I would say, I just mentioned that carving out a certain niche and going in depth into certain things, finding what you're good at, is definitely important. But that comes after your initial period of kind of onboarding and figuring out everything there is to know as much as you can. Like the fact that space is so interdisciplinary, the same way that the current training pipeline has changed, where you need to know a little bit about acquisitions, a little bit about ops, and a little bit about intel. The fact that space touches everything from how a business functions on the financial side, to what certain technology does, to how we as a Space Force tend to use that technology in actual combat. I think trying to branch out from the job you find yourself in, and figuring out all the interconnected ways that what you're doing is interacting with what someone else is doing, because there's a lot more interaction and cross-linking between those things than you would otherwise think. So in a nutshell, I would just say it involves a period of generalized onboarding before zeroing in on the things that are highest priority for you.
yeah, that's well said, Nestor. And for me, I think the answer, or how I would apply this with somebody that I was onboarding, would really depend on what position or job title they have and how much context they need to know. Because there's so many different levels from a BD perspective, business development perspective, starting out with stakeholders. Organizationally, how is the Space Force set up? Why is it set up that way? Who has decision authorities? What missions fall underneath them? What do those missions do? That's just kind of a good framework that has helped paint a picture for people that then you can get tactical. You can get down to the mission literacy that makes sense for them. And then you can, if you really want, you can give them like a bounded problem with real stakes, something small they can kind of understand and feel safe with, but not have any real consequences in terms of trying to apply what they learned in some sense. But overall, that's where I would start. And the Space Force also has great doctrine and tools out there on their website that you can go and research and look up, kind of Space 101, if you will. And I was telling Nestor this before the call, but the only kind of constant thing in the Space Force is change. So if you ramp up, just know there's going to be new information coming out all the time. It's one of those things that you're constantly educating yourself.
It's what keeps it interesting.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's such a varied service. It's such an interesting area. There's always something to learn. I do a deep dive every day into something new that I probably had no idea about, and I know you guys likely feel the same. Being able to expand that knowledge, it requires a lot of intellectual curiosity, and really excited to see you both being in this industry. So, with that said, thank you guys again for your overall candor, your perspective on various things, both inside the Space Force and now outside of it, being in industry for Oscar, and then in it for Nestor. And with that said, for the audience that attended, whether you're very familiar with the Space Force or the space industry as a whole, thank you, or being not aware at all, thank you for being able to attend. And I think this investment of your time will pay dividends, both in terms of just learning from other people, both as a panelist here as well as the audience. And I think that one of the most powerful things we can do as a graduate community, as a Long Blue Line, is that we will continue to learn from each other long after we graduate and know each other from the cadet perspective and in active duty, and then also learn what we do across various industries, whether that's space, whether that's finance, cyber, across the various industries cadets and officers can find themselves in. So overall, we hope this session offered a lot of confidence and clarity and broader connection as you navigate your own path. And then this is really just the beginning of this series, this Next Gen Presents series. We look forward to continuing this conversation or these conversations on different topics in the near future. And be sure to join us next month as we engage our panelists on the cyber domain. So from space to cyber, very exciting. Starting off nerdy, but starting off really interesting. So with that said, thank you guys again. Thank you to the audience as well as Navir and the Association of Graduates and her team for putting all this on. So thank you again for attending, and pending any final comments, we're good to go and have a great night.